G'day and welcome to the Digital Investor Podcast. I'm your host, Matt Rard, and today we have returning guest, Ewen Finser from Venture Forth Media. So for those of you that don't know Ewen runs a portfolio of content sites, and what's really interesting about Ewen is he raises millions of dollars to build websites, content sites. And basically, Ewen follows exactly what we do here at eBusiness Institute. If you're on any of our courses, Ewen is doing exactly what you're doing, but at a massive scale. Okay, so he's got big funds behind him to do this. So he's a really interesting person to talk to because he has lots of content sites, and particularly right now with the latest Google updates, I thought, let's hear it from Ewen himself. Of all the people that I could reach out to, who's the real deal and who has hundreds of websites and is right at the forefront right this minute, looking after investors' money. Let's see what's happened with the latest Google update. So Ewen, thank you so much for coming along today to share your inside experience firsthand with what's happened in the latest HCU update.
Yeah, no, it's great to be back, Matt. And excited to talk shop.
Cool. So Ewen, what has happened over the last, say, 6 months as this Google update has rolled out? It's impacted from what I've seen, and I'm talking to lots and lots of people like yourself who own big and small sites, and the results are fascinating. Some are up, some are down. I don't think it's quite as bad as what everyone's making out there with all the fear around, but like I said then, I'd love to hear from you. What sort of things have you seen over the last 6 months as this update's been rolling out?
Yeah, so we were chatting earlier. It reminds me of the early days when I was first getting started over 10 years ago in SEO, and I was just kind of coming in right in the midst of a big upheaval back then. It had a similar kind of environment and atmosphere as there is today. And I think if we kind of go back to September, the helpful content update that has had a negative impact on a lot of sites. And I think big picture, I think Google's trying to figure out how to combat spam and really AI generated content, because the
Yep.
the differentiator between you know original content and AI, like that gap has diminished. Or spam, in the old days, you'd see a site ranking and it would have really bad writing or spun content or non-native speakers talking about something they have no experience with. Be very kind of easy to spot. And so now with AI, it's like, and if anyone's experienced kind of using those tools a little bit, like at first glance, it kind of reads well. And so it's a lot easier to fool, particularly to fool algorithms, which are inherently not human. And Google has even admitted this. This is an infographic I love, which basically says, Google said in an internal meeting said, we don't understand documents, we fake it.
Yep.
And so this is what they're kind of struggling with, because their algorithm is all based on user signals. And with the last kind of 6 months, AI content has become democratized. Like anyone with a little bit of money can create, I would call it mediocre content, right? That kind of passes the smell test. That maybe was a starter affiliate site 5 years ago, that someone might buy done for you. It's like, but that bar, that the bottom has come up, basically the floor is a lot higher. And so they're trying to kind of react to that. And so we've definitely seen impacts, particularly for smaller publishers, because I think Google's kind of been defaulting to authority. And I think in particular, looking at how Reddit has kind of taken over a lot of searches.
Right.
One theory
Yeah.
I've seen out there is that until Google's trying to figure this all out, and Reddit was kind of is and was a great placeholder for them, because they kind of outsourced the problem of moderating to Reddit. And they
Yeah.
said, you know what? We don't know exactly how to deal with this, but we'll just send them to Reddit, because we know there's kind of real people in there, and it's a passionate kind of user base. And so we'll let them kind of deal with it. So we've been kind of seeing that as well, like forums and Reddit, and things that were used to be old are kind of new again. And so yeah, we've definitely seen some impacts. And I'm also very bullish on content, both long term and just outside of Google. Even I think there's a huge opportunity for content marketers to do really well in the next 5 to 10 years.
And that's what I want to cover in this podcast interview. So we'll keep everyone in suspense. That is the big part, because both Ewan and I are very bullish about content sites, because typically in these environments, as you've seen, Ewan, just like Liz and I have, when you've been around doing this for so long, it goes in waves and everyone panics. And out of it comes the most amazing opportunities, which we will cover in just a minute. Just briefly across your own portfolio, say if we picked 100 sites, what have you seen? So you've got this wide range of sites from brand new up to quite established sites by now. Did you notice any themes that you could see, or any numbers that you're happy to share?
Yeah, so we have a very broad data set, and we also have, I call it the skunk works. We have sites in various stages of experimentation. They're kind of like
Yep.
little Frankenstein sites where we're trying different tactics. And so we get a really good barometer on kind of what's happening. And I think, so we had, I would call it 10 sites out of the 100 or so that were negatively impacted and actually slapped with a Google spam penalty. And, they've been quite heavy-handed kind of with that designation on some sites. And so, what I can look when I look at those sites, I say, oh, there's like 3 or 4 of them where I'm like, these were old sites. We hadn't updated the content in a long time. They had like heavy ad loads. There wasn't spam content. It was still, human written content, but was it the best in class? Probably not anymore because we hadn't
Yeah.
updated in a long time. So
Yeah.
those I can kind of justify. And then there were, a couple that were just starter sites that had really great content on them, but didn't have all the branding, didn't have the social setup yet, and kind of just looked like someone just plopped down, a bunch of articles on a site. And so those I can also, I don't agree with the designation, but I can like, okay, I can see how someone might look at that. A manual rater can come in and say those are not, those are built for SEO. Those aren't, genuine brands. And then there were a handful, or let's say 2 or 3 that were really good sites that had high quality content, original content, were thought leaders in their space that also received uh, this designation. And so, it's kind of been a mixed bag for us overall. Our sites, like our big sites, our biggest sites are fine. We haven't seen any penalties or anything like that. I can say the last week, when Google announced this March update, it's been like just up and down for a lot of sites. Like, and I looking at Search Console the other day, we had like a nosedive on one site, and then like yesterday it was all the way back up.
Yeah.
And it's like,
That,
well, what happened? Why is that giant V there? I don't, I have no idea why. All I can say is that, Google has signaled this. They even went to the press, unlike they usually do, and prepped us all for
yep.
this update. And they even told the big, like the Parasite SEO folks, hey, you got 2 months warning to clean up your act. And so they're going to be rolling that out in May. But, it's this, I'm prepared for March to be just very turbulent. But yeah, overall, we were definitely impacted. I think starting back with the HCU, it's kind of been a negative damper on a lot of content. But I'm optimistic about
and
the March update, and at the same time, I'm not willing to just trust Google to do it correctly. So I'm looking at
Yeah, so
how do
there's a
we,
few things going on here. If you're listening to this, so this is you, and this is what I'm seeing across the board. As I'm speaking to
yeah,
lots of people, and they're all reporting the same thing. Interestingly, some of our clients with bigger sites, the traffic's going up or holding steady, but some have been impacted, and also I'm seeing it. It's just there's the famous Google dance. Everything's is very
yeah,
volatile. Something interesting you just said there. Was that, or that you said to me earlier, was you had within your portfolio, you had a portfolio of 26 sites on one Google Search Console that was completely unaffected. That's an interesting observation in itself, I think.
yeah. And I think there's all sorts of theories out there on SEO Twitter right now.
Yeah.
And
Be
again, it's like
careful
kind of like wait and
what you
see.
read, guys. If you're listening to this, just
Yeah.
be very careful. There's like you said, they're all conspiracy theories to a degree, but this is an interesting one though.
One is that, hey, if you had one site that triggered their
Yeah.
man, because it was a manual review supposedly, and who knows if they actually did a manual review, but this is some, if it's a manual review where it's someone, who isn't a niche expert necessarily, who's just kind of looking at the guidebook and saying, is this site? And if they found one in your search console, they could kind of connect. It's very easy for them to connect the dots, and maybe they then zoom in the lens a couple dials to then look at everything in that portfolio, in that under that search console. But yeah, we had one, actually, well, I had two even that were completely untouched, like not even one.
Yeah.
And it's not that we built them differently; it's just that they existed in a different search console.
And it's interesting, Ewan, back in my day, so in 2010, us old SEOers, like, and some of my friends that we used to hang out with, in our circles, there was a conspiracy theory going around, and I kind of bought into it. I won't say conspiracy, there was a theory going around that if you had, say you were doing black hat SEO, which is naughty SEO, like doing things that you shouldn't
Yeah,
do, that Google considers spammy. Amongst us black hatters, it was well known, do not put it onto Google Search Console because
yeah,
Google can go through very, very easily and link up all your sites. So you would keep it very separate. We wouldn't put Google Analytics on it or anything. That's in the old days, not saying we do black hat or we don't do any of that anymore, but just saying some of the
yeah,
circles we're in back then, it was kind of known that because I think back then Google did do a lot more manual reviews. Because here's another
yes,
interesting thing that I've seen observed with sites in the recent update that are making me think this is like the old days again, is sites with spammy ads now are understandably being hit by Google. Now that makes a lot of sense. But in the old days, again, back in 2010 and stuff, it was known if you had a website that started to come up in the rankings, and once you started to make, say, $5,000 a month or $10,000 a month, and you were one of the leading sites in your niche, because typically we were in micro niches, you stand at a very high chance of getting a manual review to check your AdSense account and make sure you weren't spamming it. And that's why we've
yeah,
been giving warnings to everyone. Google's really strict about it back then, and I'm surprised they've allowed all these spammy ads. In recent times, when you use servers like Azoic and Raptive and AdThrive and stuff, they often will, in my opinion, spam the site with more than
yeah.
3 ad blocks, and that's against Google terms and conditions. So is that something that it's fascinating to me that it's come back to the old days, but have you noticed anything across your sites, any data to back up that spammy ads are one of the flags to Google?
So it's interesting because after HCU, we had a couple sites where I looked at them and I said, okay, we have ads that adds incremental revenue, but this is really the play here is high value affiliate. And
Yeah.
so let's just turn off ads and see if that gives us a benefit. So we tried that back in October. I can't say it's helped.
Oh,
And we also haven't gotten through this March update yet. And so this has kind of been this extended period where Google has, been evaluating, I think, what the results are. And, it might take a while for if that is a hypothesis that's correct, that hey, ads are not ideal, then, we'll probably see
spammy
that
ads.
in April 1st. We'll wake up and we'll say, oh, was that correct or not? Um, and we have some current sites where, a couple of them that were hit, we said, okay, let's do a resubmit request reconsideration to the spam team or whatever, and say, hey, we removed these ads. Um, and then so it's like an open loop. It hasn't been responded to yet, but like, yeah, we are testing. I haven't seen any definitive proof. But I think zooming out a little bit, I think display ads are not it's not a great user experience. It's kind of like the lowest kind of
Yeah.
bottom feeder rung of the value chain, where it's, you're not always displaying relevant things, even if they are, minimal ads. And so we're, definitely thinking about higher value verticals, and how we can build more and not have to have ads, whether that's affiliate or our own digital products or memberships or things like that.
Perfect. Yeah. And I want to reiterate something here if you're listening to this. When we're talking these ads, I'm talking about spammy looking ads. Sticking to the Google
Yeah.
terms and conditions for the AdSense program, 3 AdSense blocks are fine. Once you get beyond that, if it starts to look like you said, some of these sites, when you look at them, you just go, oh, wow, that looks spammy. If it looks like that,
Yeah.
guess what? It's spammy. They
Yeah.
do give a really bad user experience, and be particularly wary of, if you're listening to this, is having pop-up ads on mobile devices. It really annoys Google, apparently.
Yeah.
And a lot of, content website owners don't think of the mobile experience enough with ads. It can
Right.
be really, really bad user experience, and Google have written about that. So
Yeah.
just be careful there. So it's still early days to know for sure. So no one really knows. So with your, let's change gears a little bit. So
Yeah.
you've got your bigger site, you're doing fix-ups there. Where are you seeing the opportunities now? What are you excited about? Like what's this update made you do, and how are you reevaluating things going forward?
Yeah. So it's
Or
forced me to think a
reevaluating the
lot.
opportunities going forward, I should say, because this is a bit we're excited about.
Yes. Yeah, totally. So I think, we talked about this a little bit, but I think if you zoom out, because I think if you zoom too close in, it's like the sky is falling, like, Google, SEO doesn't work anymore and all that kind of stuff. But if you zoom out and you say, look, in this environment with AI proliferation everywhere, the value of original content actually goes through the roof. So if you can build that editorial team, or if you are that person that is an enthusiast, or you can assemble those people, that's going to be a huge advantage long term, because the AI, even if you believe there's AI is going to be dominant in the future, it needs raw material to ingest, and the more AI there is, the more material they need to access. And so, I even imagine in the future, this is maybe years down the road, like the blockchain being able to kind of attribute original thoughts and original creative outputs at a fractional level to the creators. And so,
Yeah.
when the AI delivers a result, there's a supply chain, of people that get paid. And
Yeah.
so that's my big picture. But of course, it's hard to match that up with the present reality because you can't really
Yes.
build a business model on that just yet. So in the interim, and this is kind of connected to that discussion, but in the interim, community building activities, brand building activities, and to me, the tactical thing that I orient around right now is the email list. Um,
Yeah.
Both in terms of the ads, because I think with the privacy concerns that are coming up with ads, cookies and all that,
Yep.
when you have their email list, you're allowed to do more. That value of that visitor is a lot higher if you have their permission. I also think one thing we're very interested in is the rise of newsletters. We're seeing Beehive and Substack
Oh,
and that
yeah.
whole trend, which to
Yep.
me, I said, look, we're a media company. How different is that really from what we're doing building these, niche communities, niche sites? And so kind of thinking about it from that perspective of, can this can this content brand exist as a community or a newsletter or an email list? And if it can't do any of those things, it's not very interesting to me anymore. So like, I don't know, besthoverboards.com, who is that person? Well, yeah, they're trying to make a purchasing decisions, a lucrative market. In the old days, that'd be a great affiliate site. But
Yeah.
that alone is going to be very limiting, because you're just engaging with that person at the point of sale when they're making that purchasing decision. There's no real reason for them to stick around. I mean, I guess you could make it work, but I'd prefer to go into things like you mentioned, like RC planes, or home brewing, people that make their own beer or whatever, like those passionate businesses where, yes, there's affiliate, yes, there's display ads, yes, there's actually courses you could do, there's a
Yep.
membership community you could build, but you have all these options, and what ties them all together is that list. And I think what's different from a list from in relating to Google traffic is, if you're turning that flywheel with Google traffic, people are coming in the door, they're constantly churning. And I think, we've gotten very addicted or used to that model of, thousands of people just hitting our site every day and making a purchasing decision, and we're never seeing them ever again. And
Yep.
so if you can even capture 5% of them, 2% of them, and start building another flywheel separately around an email list, that, talk about a long-term growth trajectory in a durable business. That's one of the most durable businesses I can think of. And one of the great example is my friend Matt Paulson, who runs this company called marketbeat.com.
Mm.
And I think he'll do like 40 million top line this year. They have like 11 employees.
Okay.
And it started as a blog, but essentially now it's a stock market research platform. But he has, I think, close to 4.5 million email subscribers,
Yep.
and he was impacted by some of these updates, and he said, but it didn't matter, did not matter, because he had 4.5 million subscribers. Obviously, that's a huge number, but that's kind of how I'm orienting my thinking around opportunities right now. I think there's other opportunities, but like that's my North Star right now.
And I love you and really what you've come up with. By the way, we've been teaching exactly this, just ran a big webinar, and that was my thing too. And we've been, you know, we've known and taught this for many, many years, always have an email list. But now I think part of your strategy, if you're going to do the content strategy, this is where the absolute gold is. So there's two big takeaways is as AI gets more and more prevalent, real content's going to become more valuable. So you can look around for those. But I like what you've said, you, and a really good checklist is, okay, with this website, with real content on here, is it something that we can put an email list or a community of some kind or a newsletter behind it? If not, then maybe it's a bit too generic. Like you said, hoverboards.com, unless you can build a community. Now, really cool example though, the one that I mentioned to you, remember we were talking about, the standard affiliate sites like air fryers, reviews sites and stuff like that might not fit
Yeah.
that category. But I did mention, I've just recently seen it's being promoted everywhere on Amazon Kindle at the moment. There's a lady that's come out as the guru of air fryers and she's written a book. That's the sort of cool branding as
Yeah.
well that you've got to be passionate about it though. So this is what we're
Yes.
teaching. If you want to do all things being equal, if you, like you said as well, if you are passionate about a niche, it's a lot easier to get in and do the things that we need to do to be successful online. Like this lady, she's created this air fryer, a best-selling book on Amazon about air fryers, and she's got a really cool cover and really cool personal branding
Yeah.
with it, and she's gone nuts on it. That's probably the smartest way I've seen to, take what's you would consider a generic kind of review style niche and still grow it into something. But your suggestion or checklist is, can we add an email list to this website or a newsletter, is brilliant. And something else, talking about everything old is new again, that you and I were talking about, going back to, again, 2010 in our day, forums were huge. And now it looks like they're making a big comeback again as well. And it's funny, over the years, Ewan, we've gone away from teaching people to do forums because they're not passive. They take a bit of work. Someone's got to look after them, especially to get them going. But what are your thoughts around forums these days? Because it looks like they're about to make a comeback too. Google likes them now
Yeah. I
too,
think
all of a sudden.
it's totally interesting to see them come back because like we were talking, it used to be when we saw forums and search results, oh wow,
Yeah.
we know if we just published a focused article, we'd outrank them, and
Yep.
that was a great weakness signal for us to pounce.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think it's interesting. I think forums coming back, and I think Reddit is like the biggest forum that exists
Yeah.
currently, and so we're seeing that as a very interesting case study. And we were even experimenting with cross-posting some of our content over on Reddit, and it's ranking immediately. And so there's like a whole strategy, I think,
But
with leveraging their platform. But
But
I think at the end
I'm
of the day, it's
talking
still
about forums within your own niche site. So we're
yes,
starting to see, some of the examples I gave on a recent webinar that I ran was in the travel niche. Simple
yeah,
little forums are ranking on the front page of Google in highly competitive terms.
totally.
And
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 that's I think so. Google's approach is like user-generated content, right? There's this
yeah,
bucket of Reddit forums. Probably Quora is another one. And they're all kind of in the same neighborhood. That's why I mentioned it. And I think yeah, if you can have, I think the challenge with the forum is to start a forum
yeah,
it's a lot of work, to
it's a
seed
lot
the
of work.
forum.
Yeah.
But if you can either find one in the wild that you can acquire, or
Well,
if you can put in that effort and see the community, I think that's incredibly durable. The other thing, and connecting it back to the AI discussion, is that you know data is the new gold. And so if you can have a closed community that you control, that's not Reddit, that is you control the keys to the castle, and that becomes incredibly valuable. Because imagine if you create a chat bot off of your own proprietary data, your own expert community, or something like that, or just generate insights. I think there's going to be a tremendous opportunity there. But again, I kind of talked about this in actually one of my recent newsletters. This idea of raising the drawbridge, if you think of the moat concept, or at least having a drawbridge that you
yeah.
can
Yep.
you have it down, you get all like the Google traffic in, but then with the threat of AI and taking your content or whatever, or Google, you know, not getting it right or whatever, be able to kind of raise that drawbridge and say, you know what, I have the people in my castle that I can market to and that I can grow with. And I think it's ultimately it's very interesting at this time because Google is trying to algorithmically and kind of ironically get to that point where it's like they'll say, well, write for your audience and don't pay attention to SEO.
Yeah.
But of course, if
Yeah.
it's kind of this like wink, wink, but like if no one paid attention to SEO, you'd never rank, you'd never get traffic, you couldn't create content because it wouldn't be economically feasible. So there's this like tug and pull a little bit. But if you kind of take this moat concept and this email list, you start actually engaging with your community and writing newsletters to them and having a forum and communicating with them, you actually end up in a place where you're more aligned than you've ever been, and more aligned than even Google can kind of approximate with their algorithm. And so I think it's just a very interesting time. And if you kind of pick your head up a little bit and look at the kind of implications and can capture some of the value in these different channels, I think it's going to be incredibly interesting and lucrative if we can pivot fast enough and not lose our shirts.
Well, it makes me think of one of the companies that really inspired Liz and I when we got going, because we realized we were doing the same strategies as them, except they were doing it at the 100 million plus level, was internet brands. It used to be publicly listed in America, and they'd buy up content sites. And when they were publicly listed, they actually put it on their strategy was publicly available. They say we would deliberate. So this is back in 2010 and before then, it was actually in the GFC. They would deliberately buy niche sites. So the famous ones, because they were our main competitors in some of the niches, are in Dave's Garden, the Craftstar, the Pilot site that they had. They had a website about CBR 600s, which is a motorbike site. And the key thing, their strategy was they made money only off AdSense, but they always put a forum with it. So they tried to buy content sites that that they could build a forum into. And they said it was their winning strategy, even back then in the GFC 2008. And it's funny, everything old is new again. Looks like that's a big winning strategy in this day and age as well. So if you're listening to this, when you're looking around at buying opportunities, to summarize so far, because we're going to get into the next part of the final part of the interview. So far, you want to be, your search pattern might be, okay, what sites can I add an email list to, forum or newsletter, or can I buy existing old ones cheap? Because there's heaps of sites floating around with old forums sitting on them. I found a whole bunch of them live at one of our events that we ran recently. You just start looking around. You've got to go through the back pages of Google. But forums were huge years ago. You can buy those sites probably really cheaply and resurrect them. So looking at buying these opportunistic sites, Ewen, let's now go to the final part of the video, because it's really interesting to me what you're doing there, because you typically raise millions of dollars and you build sites from scratch. That's your kind of main SOP strategy. But in more recent times, and particularly now, are you more open now to opportunistically buying websites? And what would be your strategy there?
Yeah. And I think like our approach now, we call it like we're an omnivore, so we kind of, it's like build or buy versus, okay, what's the overall opportunity for this market and what are the effective distribution or traffic generation strategies at this given point in time? And so, I mean, totally looking at sites that are, I think, as we've discussed, have a forum would be great. Another thing I look at is, does it have an old email list? That's another, they might have, we acquired one recently for like $7,000. It was kind of, I had some ads, was on the decline, below the media buying threshold. So it wouldn't have, the ad network wouldn't have carried over. So the seller couldn't really sell it for its full value. But then he's like, oh, by the way, I have 24,000 email subscribers. You can have that list too. And I didn't kind of let on at the time, but I was like, wait a second. You mean I can buy 24,000 email subscribers for what, 50 cents on the dollar or less than that? Absolutely. I would love to do that. So of course, some of that list is dead, or you have to go through. And so we think we winnowed it down. We end up with 20,000 active subscribers. But that's amazing. I'll do those deals.
That's just amazing. And I want to point out something here. If you're listening to this should be very inspirational for you in terms of, I know a lot of our community are relatively, new to this game, and you're thinking, to make the big bucks, you've got to spend 6 figures or 7 figures or buy the 100,000 plus or $1 million websites. You've just heard it from Ewen himself. He has millions of dollars war chest to do this. He raises funds, yet he's still doing what? Buying the exact same sites that we recommend you guys start out on. Sites under 50 grand. So you bought a site for,
Yeah.
I'm shocked that you're buying sites so small, like 7 grand, but it's exciting, isn't it? This is what Liz and I do too. You can still hunt around. They come across your table and you find these amazing bargains. So
Yeah.
is that kind of your main thing? You're not looking at spending big money on websites? What's your sweet spot in terms, if you're going to buy sites,
Yeah.
where are you at these days in terms of buying sites, dollar wise?
So, I mean, I look at it, I think there's, having built sites from the ground up, I can say that there's good 6 months, 6 to 12 months of building
Yep.
where you're kind of like building with a certain set of materials that maybe in 12 months are outdated. Some of them, like, something changed, or, you have to basically pour a bunch of money in, which can be incredibly lucrative if it works. And at the same time, it takes a while, and time in the SEO world is like,
Yes.
12 months can be a lifetime, as we've
Yep.
seen. Everything can change.
Yep.
So the advantage of buying something that is aged and kind of had been through the ringer a little bit, there's a little bit more of a kind of a lower risk profile. And I think, looking at the intrinsic value, the other thing I didn't mention is, even if the site didn't necessarily have a forum or an email list, I do like, my number one diligence thing is just to look at the quality of the content.
Yep.
And so, because that is, there's intrinsic value there that doesn't show up on a P&L.
Yep.
And so that's why I like actually going down the ladder, because oftentimes at the lower end of the spectrum, you find enthusiasts who are putting out tremendously valuable content. They haven't really figured out the business side of it yet. As you climb the value chain, people that have, $500,000 sites, they're they're typically savvy operators, and if they don't seem like they're savvy, then don't trust that, because they're doing something right. And you can't, there's going to be less opportunity to come in with a skill set and move the needle versus some of these smaller sites. So I look at just the content inventory itself, and one way to even look at that is like, look, if the site went to zero tomorrow for whatever reason, went down, you still have that content that's portable, that can be repurposed into different things. You could put it in an email list, and coming at it from that perspective of, you can sometimes buy content, which is really hard to value if there's no revenue attached to it. But I can look at it and I know what the replacement cost is, because I've built all these sites myself. And
Perfect.
if it's an equation that works out, then we'll make that buy all day long, rather than having to expend, to build that site that we acquired, for example, we'd probably have to spend $25,000 to achieve a similar level of content, link profile, um, email list, socials that they had. And so,
And
yeah,
I think
absolutely. But it's a simple math equation for me.
And I think for anyone listening to this podcast who's part of our community and actively, learning about how to buy or build websites, what we're saying to people is that's the new strategy. Is maybe now is probably one of the best times ever possibly to be buying websites. I mean, it was always, it's always better 10 years ago, but coming full circle now, I think there's so many opportunities if you know what you're doing. Like if you've listened if you're listening to this podcast right this minute, you've just seen the amazing opportunities, hearing what Ewan's gone through and building these sites and realizing, okay, with the market in such volatility, there's a lot of opportunities, like you just said, Ewan, with that more unsophisticated, older sites that are sitting there, and genuine content is worth so much money. The ability to, maybe they haven't put an email list with it, or they've got an old email list that they haven't touched, like that one you got for $7,000. Typically, you can get these sites for under 20 grand. People want the cash. They've heard all this thing about Google doing all these big updates, and they're kind of like, nope, I'm out. So you just pick them up for cents in the dollar, or you can pick up good bargains that you can turn around. We call them either fallen angels or diamonds in the rough. So ones that are just sitting
Yes.
there that haven't been polished and shined up. And so someone like yourself, that's what. So that is that going to be a bigger part of your strategy going forward, rather than building the sites now? This is more the year where go back to buying sites.
Yeah, I think so. Right now, given where the multiples are, I think there's going to
Yeah.
be more opportunities once the reality sets in. And now we're 6 months in post HCU. Initially the challenge was, in the first couple of months, people either said, well, this can't be real. This isn't going to,
Yeah.
my site's decline and going to bounce back, or their expectations like are trailing, and so the
Yeah.
revenue had declined, but their expectations were still a couple months behind, and so
Yeah.
that's a very tricky game. But now that it's kind of sunk in, there's a lot of people that are honestly that are giving up,
Yep.
and there's a silver lining to that. There's an opportunity for the people that can see the value, see the diamonds in the rough, because everyone wants the diamond in the rough. But the reality is to properly see them, like Warren Buffett always says, like be greedy when others are fearful. It
Yep.
sounds great in theory, but like when you're actually feeling that fear,
Yeah.
that's the time, right? And it's
Yeah.
it's it's this like very difficult thing to wrestle with because yeah, you don't the news is negative maybe or isn't as optimistic as it once was, and how do you kind of overcome that while still being rational, and clear eyed about the risks and the opportunities. But yeah, I mean that's I think the time we're in. Like this is the time where if you believe in these things you believe that in the future of content, or you believe that you know email list has value and all these things, the community has value, to place some bets um, on some good assets that are never going to be on sale like they are, maybe right now.
Yep, that is absolutely fantastic, you. And I want to say a big thank you for coming along today to share your insights. And it's always our community really does appreciate hearing from yourself. It's a lot of fun having you. We get a lot of feedback, just so you know. People love listening to the updates that you and I do, and I know when you speak privately to our community as well. For us to hear our community, to be able to hear your experiences and also your advice and what you're personally looking for. I think in this particular interview, there's some really interesting things came out there for anyone listening to this podcast. So I want to say a big thank you. And I think one of the keys, which I will throw out there if you're listening to this, is we teach exactly what Ewan's doing right now. And I think the key to this is knowledge. Okay. Knowledge is how you de-risk anything in any business situation or any economic situation. So, guys, if you're interested in this and you've listened this far in the podcast, I'm presuming you haven't, for some reason you haven't done our free masterclass, make sure you get out and do it. But make sure you're out there, like Ewan just said. Don't just sit around, place some bets. You can get into this game for under $10,000. Make sure you learn how to do due diligence, know what you're looking for. But there's some really good opportunities out there. And I want to say a big thank you, Ewan, for coming along today. That was awesome.